In this chapter, we're going to look at how to fix problems that you might run into. Now, a lot of these things we've already covered in chapter 3 and 4 for Camera Raw, but there are other ways to fix these in Photoshop as well. And to be honest, there's usually multiple ways to do something in Photoshop, and sometimes one method might work while one might not. So it's good to know the different ways in case something's just not working how you think it's going to. So go ahead and download these files by clicking on each file name, and then we're going to open them all up in Photoshop. All right, let's see. All right. Okay, for these in Camera Raw, just go ahead and open them in Photoshop. And what I did was, this one was selected, I held down Command while I clicked on this one, and I'm going to hit open. Alright, let me go to the beginning of the chapter real quick. Alright, so let's go to the first one. Here we go. Alright, so before we actually get started on this first page, we're going to do the second page first. And it's about fixing images of buildings with lens problems, and you can see that it's really all just, everything's kind of leaning inside. Before I do that, in order for us to see how it's actually stretching the image, we're going to expand the canvas size. So let's make sure we're in Photoshop. Let's go to Image, Canvas Size, and I'm going to switch this to inches here. And I'm going to add a couple inches to both sides by adding some more inches to the width. So right now it says 14.187. Let's go ahead and just put in 16. And since it's expanding from the middle, it should be adding a bit of white space to both sides of this area. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And now we have that extra white space going on. All right. So if you remember from the previous chapters, there was a place in Camera Raw where you could play with how the buildings are moving and such. This time though, we're going to go up to Filter, and we're going to go up to Lens Correction. Alright, so we can click on, there's an auto correction, and we can click on Geometric Distortion, and it's going to do a little bit. But if you see here, it's kind of having a hard time figuring out something in the metadata is gone. So it's not knowing exactly which model or lens it's using. It's actually asking me to choose here. And neither of these are really doing that great of a job. So if something like this happens, we can actually come over here to this Custom tab and move things around this way. So we have Remove Distortion, which is like if you have a fisheye lens where something in the middle is really popping out, which it looks like this might be slightly distorted. So let's sink it back in just a little bit. And I'm looking at the edge of the water there and trying to see where it looks straightest. I'm going to go with just a little bit there. And then we have this vertical perspective. Okay, and you can see as I'm moving it, the buildings are starting to get straighter. So try to eye it till these buildings are looking pretty straight here. Okay, it looks good. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And now we have much straighter buildings. If I went back here to my history, I can go back to the open. You can tell how much of a difference that really makes. Okay, so now that we've done this, you can see we have these white areas here, and we can crop this out, but instead we're going to try something else. We're going to go back a page, and we're going to do this realistically fill in gaps in my image. So what we're going to do is we're going to select both of these white areas, and we're going to do that using our quick selection tool, which is right over here. If I hold down here, we have a quick selection tool and a magic wand tool. We're going to do the quick selection tool, and I'm going to click in this white area, And you can see that there's like what we call the marching ants, so this line going around, so that area is selected. I'm going to hold down Shift to add to this selection. And once I'm holding down Shift, I'm going to click in this other white area, and now that is selected also. Now the selection is, let me zoom in a little bit. I'm going to hold down the space bar and click and drag to move over there. And it is right on the edge there. And sometimes what happens is, you can even see right up here, is that it doesn't quite get the whole area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to select, and I'm going to go to modify. I want to modify my selection. I want to expand it. I want to make it a little bit larger. So I'm going to expand, and I'm just going to put in 10 pixels and hit OK. And now you can see that it is overlapping this area a little bit. Let's go ahead and zoom out a little. And now I can go up to Edit. I'm going to go to Fill. When I click on Fill, it asks you how you want to fill it. And you can do a couple different things. You can do black, gray, white, certain colors, patterns. We're going to keep it on this content aware. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at the rest of the area around here and try to fill this in with something that's similar. Let's see how well it does. And this might take a moment, especially the larger the area, the longer it's going to take. In fact, if it's a really large area, sometimes I'll just break it up into smaller pieces. Alright, so it's filled it in, and it looks like it's done a pretty darn good job. I'm going to deselect by hitting Command D. Deselect, you can also go up here to Select, and then you'd be able to hit the deselect there. But now we can see that it's done a pretty good job of filling in what it thinks it should be there. Now, this doesn't always work great. In fact, the more complicated the photo is in the areas you're trying to fill, the less success you usually have. Sometimes you can try doing it a couple times, keeping the selection, and just keep doing the fill over and over and seeing which one works better. But yeah, this could be really great. I find it also works pretty darn good in skies. So it's a nice fix when you have an issue like this. All right, so that's it for this one. Let's make sure that we're opening up our history panel, and we're going to go ahead and take our screenshot and move on to the next. Okay, removing fringe. Let's go ahead and open up this 3 to 4 color fringe. Now, if we zoom in on this bird, you can see that there is this like really red line going along the edge here. And so we want to fix that. And we already talked about doing that in Camera Raw, but again, this is another way to do it. And in fact, I'm going to make a copy of this layer so that I can kind of do like before and after by turning off my layers to see what's going on. I'm going to make a copy by doing Command J. You can also drag a layer to the little plus sign. It'll make a copy that way also. Alright, so now that I've made my copy, let's go to Filter. And we're going to go to that Lens Correction filter again. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the area. And if I zoom in, again, I can hold down spacebar, it turns to the hand tool, I can click and drag to where I want to go. And I'm going to come here to Custom. Now if you notice, there is no camera information or anything this time. That's because this is a JPEG. You're only going to get that camera information if you're working on a RAW file. Okay, let's go to Custom, and here's the chromatic aberration area. So I'm seeing here that it looks like it's a reddish line, so I'm going to go to this here and move it. And sometimes you got to move it a bit and let go and let it process. And let's move it a bit more. Okay, so it looks like the fringe is moving, so it's not as crazy on this side, but it is starting to show up on this side a bit. Right down here, there's a preview button that you can click off and back on again to see the difference. So off, you can see that red is pretty intense, and it did get a bit better. Let's keep going with the slider and see how it looks. And again, I'm going to turn it off, turn it back on. It's not a huge difference, but it did help a little bit. Let's see if this one does help. Okay, that one doesn't seem to be really helping at all. Let's take it this way. Nope, not really helping. So sometimes, you know, we can only do as much as we can with the tools we have. Um, if I were going to keep working on this, I might be using some other tools, like my cloning tools, to try to cover this up. But this is at least a start. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And again, we can turn it off, and you can see that there is a bit of a difference. It is a bit more reddish than when we fixed it, and it looks a little bit better. And again, this is an issue that happens a lot with quote-unquote cheaper lenses, especially when you zoom in. But it is looking better. I'm going to turn it off, turn it back on. All right, it is looking slightly better. All right, so let's move on. And again, as a reminder, make sure that you're pausing to read the actual pages, because there's some great tips in here. All right, now this is a fairly new feature. It's pretty cool. It's called Content Aware Scale. Photoshop is getting so much smarter every time they come up with a new update, and this one just kind of amazes me. So this scale, Content Aware Scale, will help you stretch your image, and it keeps an eye. Somehow it figures out what the subject is and keeps that where it is while just stretching the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to move to the crop tool real quick. And it's set to, if it's not set for you already, make sure you go ahead and set it to the 4x5 or 8x10. And let's take these corners and make them a little larger. Alright, so let's say I wanted to do an 8x10 print, and I wanted to include this whole area, but now I have all this white space. I'm going to go ahead and hit this check mark sign to keep this crop. And now I'm going to go to, I'm going to make sure I'm on the layer I want to be on. And then I'm going to go to the Edit menu and choose Content Aware Scale. Okay, now I can click here and drag down, and the background is moving, but the bird is not. Alright, that's pretty amazing stuff. I'm going to hit this check mark. You can also hit return to keep this. Alright, so now make sure that you're opening up your history and taking your screenshot. Alright, let's move on. So we have our group shots here, and if you see, I just switched and I still have my crop tool up. All you have to do is hit the move tool and you'll be out of the crop tool section. So we have two group shots. We have group shot 1 and group shot 2. And the big difference, what we're trying to fix, is that he's looking to the side, and so we want to actually combine these two photos so that he's looking face forward and smiling with these guys over here. Alright, so there are a couple different ways to do this. I'm going to show you a couple ways. So, first off, we'll do the book way, which says, let's see. Alright, to grab your lasso tool, and we're going to go ahead and come over to the one with where the face is looking pretty good here, and we're going to click and drag around to make a selection. And he's saying just select around the eyes. I always like to over select just in case, because I know I can use my masks to take care of it. Alright, so then to soften the edges of your selection, you can go to the select menu under modify and choose feather. Alright, let's do that. Select, modify, feather, and let's go with, we'll just do 10 pixels. Okay. And now it's going to go, now it's telling us to do Command C, which is Command Copy. And now we're going to go to the other group shot and hit Command V. Alright, and there's that. You can see it's on its own layer. I'm going to go to my Move tool and move it right over. Yeah, I did a pretty good job right off the bat. And really, we can now just look at the shirt and try to match it up as best as possible. Another thing you can actually do is click on this layer, hold down Shift and click on the background layer so they're both selected. Then you can go up to Edit, Auto Align Layers. Just leave it on auto and hit OK. And, oh, it smudged his face a little bit. So try to align the layers as best as possible. I don't really like what it did there, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Command Z. But just to let you know that that is an option, and sometimes that works really well. Okay, let's undo that. And instead, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a layer mask to this. And I'm going to take the opacity down so we can see kind of both faces. Let's zoom in, Command plus a couple times, holding down my space bar and then clicking and dragging. All right, and now that I'm on my move tool, I'm going to use the arrow keys to just kind of move this around and line up his features, and his head moved quite a bit, so that's actually where we're going to, let's go ahead and just do the eyes after all. So I'm going to come over here, let's take this opacity back up a little bit. All right, I'm going to come back to my layer mask, grab my brush tool. I'm going to be brushing with black to mask or hide what's going on. Oop. My opacity is down. Let's take the opacity back up. If there's some issues happening and it's not working quite how you want it, always take a look up here at the options bar to see what's going on. Okay, and if you're having a hard time seeing what's going on and which one's what, you can turn off the underneath layer, the background layer, to get a better idea. So I want to change this a little bit harder. And I'm just going to worry about the eyes. All right, now that I have just basically the eyes, let's see. All right, that's fine. Let's turn this layer back on. And now I can go ahead and do what I was doing before. And let's take the opacity of this layer down a little bit. And let me zoom in. And I'm going to hit V to go to my move tool. And now I can move these eyes around to try to line them up as best as possible with them. That looks about right there. All right, and I'm also noticing that there's like this area right here, so I'm going to come back here and bring up my brush tool again, hitting the B, and just taking care of that. I'm just going to go around this area just a little bit more. And I'm going to come back here, take my opacity back up. All right, and then let's fix this part just a little bit over here. All right. Not too shabby. So we've changed his eyes a bit. So now everyone's looking forward. Dun-da-da-da. Nice job. All right. So make sure that your history panel is open and stretched down if necessary. Your layers panel is open, and you can go ahead and take your screenshot. All right. Fixing washed out skies. Now we've already done this before. Let's see, what is this, 5? So I need 6. If you can't see all of your files up here, by the way, there's this double arrow right here. If you click here, oops, on this little double arrow, you can see all of the files that are open, and there's my 6, washed out skies. All right, so we've already played with this a little bit. But now we're going to go back into the camera raw filter to actually use the HSL panel a little bit differently than how we used it before. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to make a copy of this by hitting Command J and go up to Filter and go down to Camera Raw Filter. where was it? Oh yes, it's under color mixer now. And it's telling us to go ahead and click on the luminance tab and then simply drag the blue slider to the left and your dreary skies turn bluer. So luminance tab, blues, and they're turning bluer. Woohoo! All right. Another thing you can do is go back to right up here to vibrance in the basic panel and take that vibrance up, and you can see it's also affecting the greens. And yet another tip they give is to try the adjustment brush. So if you remember, the adjustment brush is right here to the side. And we can now actually select color while we're brushing over. So let's select a blue. Hit OK. And now we can paint with the blue wherever you want. Now it's also going over all this. I'm not being very careful, but you could get in there and get super careful. We can also actually try doing the auto mask. So I'm going to hit undo a couple times. Let's try and see how the auto mask does. It doesn't look like it's really doing that great of a job. Oh well, Command Z. So you would have to just be a little bit careful. Come in here. And paint that blue on. Now, if you remember from Chapter 7, we could do this and such, and then go back and forth with the eraser and be like, oh no, I didn't want to get that part and such. But if you remember from Chapter 7, we also have that other option where we could have just gone in to adding an adjustment layer with color and then adding a mask there. So as you can see, there's multiple ways to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit delete. And I'm going to hit OK. Alright, and now if I turn this layer on, we can see like a before and after. That is pretty intense. Alright, sweet. Open up your history panel and take your screenshot. And let's move on. Alright, so as I mentioned, there isn't a number 7. And why isn't there a number 7? Because they're talking about fixing red eye in Camera Raw, which we already did. So I'm not going to make you guys do that exact same thing over again. Okay, so let's move on to 8 and 9, healing and cloning. Alright, so 8 and 9 we have removing spots or distracting stuff. If you remember in Camera Raw, we had a very similar tool. We're going to come over here, and it's actually a spot healing brush tool. If you hit J, that's the shortcut to get to it. And we can just click and kind of brush over, and it'll take care of it. We also have a healing brush, which is the same thing except you pick where it's going to heal from first. So if you hold down Option, you get this little like target key, and you can click where you want it to heal from, and then you can see as I'm moving over that it is taking that area and using that to heal. I'm going to brush, and it heals as well. So those are two different tools. They're very similar. And I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my spot healing brush tool by hitting J. J. Okay, there it goes. And just brushing over these spots here. Okay, let's go to the next page. And we also are going to be looking at Clone Stamp tool. So the Clone Stamp tool basically is close to it's very similar to the healing brush. It's just that instead of like the healing brush, you pick where you're going to heal from, and then it like blends it. The clone takes the exact area that you picked and covers up the area. So there's not like this quote-unquote healing where the computer's kind of guessing. It just takes it straight up and clones from one area to another. So let me show you what I mean. There's this little stamp looking icon right here. Click there to go to the Clone Stamp tool. So now I'm going to pick where it's going to be sampling from. So it's going to sample from right up here. and I'm going to hold down that Option key to get my little target tool, target looking thing, click once, then I'm going to move right down, and now I can just start moving along, and you can see that little like plus sign above the circle. That's showing me where it is sampling from still. So it's not sampling from the same place, it's moving along with you. And now right here, it's ran out of places because when I went in to pick where I was going to be sampling from, I was actually a little bit to the side here. So I'm just gonna come up here and pick over here again and go in like that. Oop, missed a little bit there, missed a little bit there. Okay, let's get in here. And sometimes you do have to move around where you're sampling from as you move. Oop, went a little bit too far. Okay, and so the same, so I messed up a little bit right there. So I could either go back, I could also come here, hold down that Option again, sample from here, and use that right there to try to cover that up. And I didn't do the best job. Sometimes it takes a couple times. So let's try it again. This is where having a steady hand really comes in handy. Okay, not too shabby. Looking better. All right, so I took care of those spots and I took out that line. Bam. Let's go ahead and take our screenshot. Oh, bring down our history panel. Don't forget that. Take your screenshot. And there we go. All right, moving forward. All right, so here's another one, reducing noise. This is pretty much the exact same thing that we did last time. And just an FYI, it doesn't really work that well, but the old school way is there is a noise filter to reduce noise. Like I said, it doesn't really do that great of a job, so use Camera Raw. What it does in there is a lot better. Okay, moving forward. All right, removing larger things. Let's move on to 11 and 12. Whoops. All right. So this first one is we are using content aware again. So let's try that out. I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this layer, Command J. I'm going to zoom in here. And I'm going to get my lasso tool and make a selection around this sign here. Okay. And now that I've done that, I can come up to Fill, Edit, Fill, Content Aware, okay. And bam, it looked around at the areas around here and filled it in with what I thought it wanted. Sweet. So let's see. We can also do the patch tool. So here's the patch tool right here. And I'm going to go ahead and do Command D to deselect. I'm going to go ahead and take care of this pipe here. Let's go ahead and, like the selection tool, just make like a little, or lasso tool, make a selection around that. And now I'm going to click and drag to a place next to it. And there you go. It's covered it up. Super sweet. Now, let's see. Next we have another way. Let's see. This one's talking about the clone stamp tool, which I've showed you how to use the clone stamp tool already, but let's give it another go over here. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, because if I tried to clone stamp something right now over here, because it's not part of the selection, it wouldn't actually do anything. So I need to make sure that I deselect, or else everything I do is only going to affect the area in here. So Command D, I'm going to zoom in over here, and we'll have the clone stamp tool up. I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key, and I'm going to try to start right where this gray line is going. If you can have something to visually start off with, that can help lining things up. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to try to get that middle black line of my tool here right on that gray line. I'm going to click. And now I'm going to start. Yep, there we go. I did pretty good for my first run. So what do I mean by I did good by my first run is I lined it up well. I'm going to go ahead and do Command Z to show you what I'm talking about. So if I had clicked here, got my option up, clicked here, but then accidentally started up here instead, see how it mismatched that gray area? It's because I didn't start completely, you know, I clicked here, but then I started a little bit too high. So that's something to watch out for. All right, but on this, what do we want to do? Okay, so it's saying to you, let's go ahead and make a selection using the rectangular marquee tool. So here's the rectangular marquee. I'm going to make a selection next to this area. And actually, I'm going to Command Z to undo. I'm going to go a little bit bigger, just so I have some options, because we can always use a layer mask to take stuff off. It says to go to the select menu and to go down to modify and feather. I'm going to feather it by 10 pixels, hit OK. All right, and then press Command J. So I'm going to hit Command J, and you can see it's created a new layer with just that area. If I turn these off, you'll see right there. There is that copy of that area, that selection that I just made. So let's turn this back on. Pick up your Move tool. And now I'm going to click and drag it over. Now the feather, it looks like my issue with the feather is that there's not a lot of pixels in this image. So that feather basically feathered all the way across from one side to another. So let's go ahead and undo, Command Z a couple times, undo again. All right. This time I'm going to go to image, let's see, select, and I'm going to go to modify, I'm going to go to feather, and this time I'm going to try doing it, let's just do, I don't know, 3 pixels. Okay, and now I'm going to hit the Command J to make that copy. Let's see if it does a better job that time. Yay, much better. And if you want to use the arrow keys, if you need to like match up, I'm looking at that gray line down there to get it just right, you can totally do that. Now the big issue with using the clone stamp tool or something like this is that you can get these repeated patterns. So if you see this brick here is kind of, you know, for most of these it's not a big deal because bricks are just repeated patterns anyways, but this one is kind of unique, and so now I have 2 perfectly copied unique bricks there, which of course wouldn't happen in real life. So that's where you maybe would want to come back in with like your clone stamp tool and find another area. Let's see, say right over here, select that area, fill it in a little bit so you don't have that repeated pattern. That is a dead giveaway on bad Photoshop jobs, is when you see repeated patterns happening because they clone stamped a bunch of stuff out. Alright, so let's see the before and after. So we took out that, we took out that. Sweet. Nice job. Let's go ahead and open up our history panel. There it is, our layer panel is open. Take a screenshot and we're all done. Now, I think someone's been asking about saving these when you're done. So you have your screenshots, and that's what you're actually turning in. But as you close these, it's going to ask you if you want to save changes. You can either save it and it will basically keep the same name and everything. In this case, because it started off as a JPEG, it wants to save it as a Photoshop format, and that'll keep all of your layers. So that's fine. If you want to make a new folder that says like completed, or in this case, Chapter 8 completed, that's completely fine. Then you can add even your name to it if you want. So it doesn't have the exact same name as the other file and you don't get confused, and hit save. Okay, and it'll close. And you could do this for each one of your files. so that once you are done with Photoshop and you close everything up, it doesn't open back up again.